For 3 centuries, the Romanov dynasty ruled the Russian Empire with absolute authority. Yet, in a single year, that massive imperial structure collapsed, completely replaced by a radical political fringe group. By early 1917, the country was at a breaking point. Millions of peasants lived in deep poverty, while industrial workers faced brutal conditions in the cities. Tsar Nicholas II sat at the top of a wealthy aristocracy, disconnected from the heavy military losses and severe food shortages caused by Russia's involvement in the First World War. The breaking point arrived in March 1917. Widespread unrest spilled into the streets during the February Revolution, a massive popular uprising that finally forced the Tsar to abdicate. The Tsar's departure left the hunger and the war untouched. It stripped away the existing state apparatus, leaving a dangerous power vacuum right in the middle of a national crisis. A new provisional government stepped in to fill that void. They took control of the state with promises to implement democratic reforms and stabilize the country. Then they made a deeply unpopular decision. Despite widespread exhaustion across the military and the public, the new government chose to keep Russia fighting in the First World War. The physical and economic toll of that choice was devastating. Inflation soared, supply chains broke down, and severe food shortages led to outright starvation in many communities. By ignoring the immediate survival needs of the population, the provisional government lost its public support almost overnight. They were a government without public trust, leaving the door wide open for anyone offering a real alternative. That alternative came from Vladimir Lenin and his Bolshevik faction. They were a highly organized group who recognized just how vulnerable the new state actually was. The Bolsheviks deployed a targeted message: peace, land, and bread. Peace for soldiers, land for peasants, and bread for workers. Meanwhile, local workers' councils, Soviets, were springing up everywhere, rapidly gaining influence across the country. Lenin's faction systematically gained control over these local Soviets. They used them to bypass the official government entirely, building an organized, parallel power structure. They didn't bother debating policy in the capital. By offering direct, tangible solutions to a desperate population at the local level, the Bolsheviks effectively built their own massive political army. In November 1917, they put that army to use. The Bolsheviks launched what became known as the October Revolution, executing a highly organized, militarized strike against the state. The initial takeover functioned as a series of localized tactical strikes. Armed Bolshevik supporters seized key bridges, railways, and communication centers within the capital city of Petrograd. They overthrew the provisional government and installed their own leadership at the top of the hierarchy. The center of Russian political power now belonged to them. The takeover was surprisingly fast. Because the provisional government had drained its own public support, the Bolsheviks faced very little organized resistance during the initial coup. The Bolsheviks had seized the capital's control room, but governing the rest of the empire would prove a far greater challenge. Their true test of legitimacy was only beginning. They faced an immediate crisis. Millions of Russians, including moderates, liberals, and even other socialists, rejected the coup and viewed the new government as illegitimate. The Bolsheviks responded with absolute force. In January 1918, when they failed to secure a majority in the nationwide elections, they sent armed guards to permanently dissolve the democratically elected Constituent Assembly. They also had to deliver on their promise of peace. To pull Russia out of the First World War, Lenin signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk with Germany. The terms were punishing. Russia was forced to surrender vast stretches of its western territory, giving up millions of citizens, crucial agricultural land, and a massive portion of its industrial resources. By destroying the country's elected assembly and surrendering enormous swaths of national land, the new leadership made their priorities clear. They were willing to sacrifice both democratic will and national pride to maintain absolute control. The backlash was immediate. A furious coalition of monarchists, liberals, and former imperial officers formed to fight back against Bolshevik rule. This outrage fractured the nation. Russia plunged into a brutal, multi-year civil war between the Bolshevik Red Army and the anti-communist White forces. The scale of the violence was catastrophic. By the time the fighting finally stopped, an estimated 7 to 12 million people had died. largely from famine, disease, and civilian executions. The Red Army eventually overpowered the divided white forces, crushing all remaining opposition. By December 1922, the victorious Bolsheviks formally created the Soviet Union. Lenin's strategy proved how effectively a small, organized group can exploit a subtle peace and turned it into a violent, years-long crucible, one that ultimately forged a state that would dominate global politics for the rest of the 20th century.